Hey guys, tonight we're heading back, way back, to a time when kings wore breastplates, philosophers were just old guys in togas, and horses? Well, some of them were practically celebrities. You're crouched beside a campfire, the air thick with the tang of sweat, leather, and something suspiciously like boiled onions. Around you, soldiers are curling into their cloaks, murmuring in Macedonian, while torches flicker against the heavy fabric of Alexander's command tent. Inside? The man himself? Pacing, plotting, probably monologuing. But it's the snoring that gets your attention. That's not Alexander. That's the horse. Yes, the royal horse. So enormous, so muscled, and so spoiled, it's got a tent to itself. Its name? Bucephalus. He doesn't just have gear, he has custom armor. You, on the other hand, sleep on rocks. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, if you're watching from your hammock in Hanoi or your couch in Calgary, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you all drift off from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You pull your cloak tighter as the Anatolian wind whips through the encampment. In the center of this uneasy calm is Alexander the Great, young, intense, and absolutely not over his horse. Tomorrow, they'll fight Darius III of Persia at the Battle of Issus. But tonight, it's all about rituals. The torches are trimmed just right. The astrologers have mumbled their blessings. Alexander has even made a quiet offering at Bucephalus's feet, some crushed figs and a few stalks of barley that, quite frankly, you wouldn't mind eating yourself. You might think it's ridiculous, all this fuss over a horse. But then, Bucephalus isn't just any warhorse. He's part mascot, part myth, and part mobile thundercloud. He's got hooves the size of dinner plates and a glare that could unnerve an enemy line. And here's the kicker. Alexander's men trust the horse almost as much as they trust the king. There's something soothing about the animal's steady breath, about the way his coat shines, even in the dim firelight. You'd swear someone brushed him every hour. His armor, polished to a golden shimmer, rests on a rack like it's sacred. One of the squires hums a lullaby while oiling the bit. You're not sure if it's for the horse or himself. Across the camp, soldiers are murmuring in low tones. Some are betting how long they'll last against Persian scythed chariots. Others are retelling stories of how Alexander once charged through a line of enemy troops, sword out, hair wild, and Bucephalus kicking up divine clouds of dust behind him. And because soldiers are nothing if not practical, a few are trying to calculate how many weeks of oats could be saved if the horse just retired. You pretend not to hear them. No one talks like that around Alexander, not if they like their heads. The air is tight with tension. The scouts have reported Persian movements. The tents are filled with prayers and sharpening whetstones. But the real moment of calm, it's this one. Right now. A king, a horse, and a hush before history unfolds. Historians still argue whether Alexander's obsession with Bucephalus was sentimental or symbolic. Some think the horse represented divine favor, a kind of living omen. Others think it was tactical branding. After all, a fearless horse makes a fearless leader seem even more untouchable. But in the moment, as you nestle into your scratchy blanket, you're not thinking about politics or destiny. You're watching a man check on his best friend. He adjusts the horse's blanket. He scratches behind Bucephalus's ear. The great general whispers something no one else hears, and the horse twitches an ear like he understands. Anecdotes vary, but one fringe theory even suggests Bucephalus could sense danger before the scouts. You don't buy it, exactly, but when a creature weighs over 1,000 pounds and can charge a phalanx, you're not going to argue. Eventually, the torches are doused, the tent flaps are secured, and the king lies down, not far from his beast. You wonder if Alexander dreams of conquests, or of a simpler time, when he was just a boy and that stubborn horse nearly threw him off a cliff. The wind slows, the fire crackles low, even the snoring seems softer. Tomorrow, the world might shift, empires might fall, but tonight it's just a horse, a boy king, and the gentle rhythm of breath in the dark. You pull your cloak tighter as the wind shifts direction, bringing the sharp smell of sea salt and pine resin. Somewhere, a donkey brays, but you barely notice. Because tonight, you're not in a tent anymore. You're in a memory, a dusty Macedonian field. The sun overhead is hot enough to bake figs in your saddlebag, and a boy stands in the center of a ring of adults, surrounded by the laughter of stable hands and the exasperated sighs of noblemen. That boy? About 12 years old. Hair too long, eyes too sharp, and the horse in front of him? Absolutely terrifying. Massive, wild-eyed, with flaring nostrils and a streak of white down its chest like a bolt of lightning caught mid-fall. The beast is lashing its tail like it's preparing to fight the sun. You can feel the tension crackle off it like static. Everyone else has tried to ride it, and every single one has failed, spectacularly. Bruised ribs, dislocated shoulders. One poor soul swears he saw his life flash before his eyes in the saddle. Spoiler, it was mostly unpaid taxes and lentils. But Alexander? He doesn't flinch. Historians agree. This moment was real. The sources vary in detail, but the heart of the story holds. The horse, soon to be named Bucephalus, was a gift, or an expensive failed deal depending on who you ask, brought to King Philip II. When no one could tame it, Philip ordered the animal taken away. Useless. Dangerous. Possibly cursed. Alexander, still years away from becoming the Great, stepped forward. He asked for one chance. His father raised an eyebrow. A few generals chuckled behind their beards. One chance was all he needed. You watch him approach, slow and steady, whispering soft nothings in a tongue you can't understand. Then he does something strange. He turns the horse's head toward the sun. Everyone blinks, confused. But you get it. You see the shadows vanish from the beast's eyes. You see its muscles stop twitching. That was it. The horse had been afraid of its own shadow, literally. Alexander saw it. No one else did. And then, he mounted it like he was born for the saddle. No yanking, no spurring, just a fluid, almost theatrical swing of the leg. Bucephalus stilled, the crowd stilled, and then they moved, together, boy and horse. They galloped across the field, a blur of hooves and hair. Every breath was thunder, every step echoed like prophecy. You can't help but smile, because in that moment, Alexander didn't just tame a horse, he tamed a symbol, a creature thought untouchable, dangerous, untrainable. And now, it followed him like a shadow that never feared the sun again. Historians still argue whether the horse was truly untamable or just poorly handled. Some fringe theorists suggest the entire story was propaganda, fabricated to elevate Alexander's divine image from childhood. But there's just too much smoke here for no fire. Ancient texts from Plutarch to Arrian agree. Whatever happened that day, it changed everything. Philip was stunned. He reportedly turned to his son and said, "My boy, you must find a kingdom big enough for your ambitions. Macedonia is too small for you." You're not sure if he meant it as praise or warning. Probably both. After that, Bucephalus wasn't just a horse. He was the horse. The only one Alexander would ride into battle. The only one trusted not to panic when surrounded. And, as some sources claim, the only creature that could throw Alexander off. Not physically, but emotionally. In the following weeks, Bucephalus became a feature of the court. His feed was of the highest quality. His stall was marble-lined. No, really. There are texts that hint his quarters were nicer than those of minor nobles. He was brushed thrice daily. A dedicated stable boy reportedly sang to him to help him sleep. And Alexander? He checked on him personally, even when wounded or ill. There's a whisper of a story, probably apocryphal, about how Alexander once delayed an audience with foreign diplomats because Bucephalus had a stone in his hoof. You sit now, invisible but present, watching the stable hands fuss over the stallion like nervous parents before a school play. The saddle is being cleaned for the 100th time. A garland of laurel rests nearby, because yes, they decorate the horse too. One soldier claims Bucephalus has his own amulet, blessed by an oracle. Another says he once saw the beast wink at Alexander before a charge. Quirky? Sure. But in a world where omens decide whether men live or die, you don't laugh at lucky horses. You hear Alexander talking to someone, perhaps a friend, perhaps a historian, who will one day turn this day into a footnote. He says something about loyalty, about how animals see us clearly, without ambition or flattery. And you get the sense that to him, Bucephalus isn't just a tool of war. He's an anchor, a constant in a life that's about to become anything but. The sun lowers, the crowd disperses, the stable is quiet again, and the boy and the beast, who together just rewrote the expectations of a kingdom, share a moment of quiet as the first stars appear over Pella. The morning sun casts long shadows across the Macedonian courtyard, and you're trotting alongside Alexander again. But this time, the horse has a name, Bucephalus. Roughly translated, it means ox head, and yes, that's about as flattering as calling someone cowface. But don't worry, there's a twist. The naming is a little foggy in the historical record. Most sources agree Alexander named the horse himself, inspired either by the shape of the animal's head or a particular mark, a white star-shaped patch on Bucephalus's forehead that looked vaguely like a bull's horned skull. Quirky? Yes. Majestic? Absolutely not. But remember, in ancient times, bulls were powerful, sacred animals. Oxen pulled plows, pulled chariots, and pulled sacrifices straight to the gods. So naming your horse after a bull wasn't an insult, it was a flex. You watch Alexander lead Bucephalus down the palace corridors, yes, inside, while servants trail behind with brushes, buckets, and a small basket of figs. A bronze plate on the stable door reads Bucephalus, carved in thick, dramatic lettering. And no one thinks it's weird that a horse has a nameplate like a minor official. Because by now, Bucephalus is a someone, not a something. Historians still debate the exact meaning behind the name. Was it literal? Metaphorical? Was Bucephalus a common name for warhorses? Or was it uniquely crafted to brand the beast as a myth in the making? There are even fringe theories that the horse was renamed after showing valor in battle. One odd bit of trivia? There's a coin from centuries later, minted in India, that shows a horse with ox-like horns. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe the name just stuck in people's minds like an ancient sticker on a well-worn saddle. But Alexander wasn't just branding a horse. He was building a legend. You trail them down to the riverbank, where the young prince likes to ride alone. No guards, no tutors, just the rhythmic clomp of hooves and the chirping of cicadas. The boy talks to Bucephalus constantly, about politics, about Homer, about which general has the stinkiest armor. And the horse, bless him, listens like a seasoned therapist. Occasionally, he snorts in what you're pretty sure is judgment. On one ride, Alexander declares that when he becomes king, Bucephalus will be with him at every battle. People say that's cute. Later, they'll call it prophecy. And as you follow them back to the palace, you catch sight of one of Aristotle's scrolls propped near the training yard. That's right, the Aristotle, Alexander's personal tutor. Historians mostly agree that the philosopher and the prince spent several years together. But what no one talks about, the horse was there too. Not learning logic or ethics, obviously, but present, maybe nuzzling at a corner of a papyrus, maybe listening to a discourse on metaphysics while chewing oats. One of Aristotle's lesser-known students reportedly tried to measure Bucephalus's skull for scientific purposes. He got lightly kicked. That student later switched careers. Sensible move. The connection between horse and boy only grew as the years passed. Bucephalus, by all accounts, was high-strung. Difficult with anyone, except Alexander. Yet under him, the horse was calm, responsive, even gentle. If you call galloping headlong into battle gentle. There are scrolls suggesting Alexander once rode the horse through a thunderstorm just to prove it wouldn't flinch. Others say Bucephalus learned to recognize Alexander's voice from 100 paces. Now, here's where things get weird. One fringe theory, dismissed by most historians but too fun to ignore, claims that Alexander believed Bucephalus had a soul intertwined with his own, that they were linked by fate, that the horse dreamed when Alexander did. You imagine the king mumbling in his sleep and the horse twitching in tandem. Spooky? Maybe, but oddly touching. You're jolted back to the present as the courtyard buzzes with preparations, war drums, flag banners, sharpening swords. Bucephalus is being fitted for new armor, a custom bronze plate engraved with a curled lion motif. Overkill? Absolutely. But he wears it like a model on a runway. Someone makes a joke about the horse having a better wardrobe than the officers. You don't laugh out loud. You value your kneecaps. In the palace halls, you overhear a servant saying the gods must have blessed Bucephalus with immortality. Alexander grins. Not immortality, he says, but I'll make sure he's remembered. And you believe him. Because this isn't just a horse. It's a symbol of destiny, of mastery, of partnership between man and beast. And Alexander, even as a teenager, already knows how to build a myth. As the sun sets over the Macedonian hills, you watch the two of them, boy and beast, walking side by side, casting one long, unbroken shadow. The sky is overcast now, a gentle breeze sweeping through the Macedonian hills as you shadow Alexander and Bucephalus on yet another ride, not to battle, not to parade, but to the outskirts of a dusty training field. Here, the real action unfolds. This is where you witness something almost absurd. Soldiers lining up in polished rows, armor gleaming, spears poised, and a horse strutting past them like a general. It becomes obvious quickly. Bucephalus doesn't just belong to Alexander. He outranks half the army. You can tell from the way people speak about him, in whispers, in reverent tones. One man swears the horse once knocked over a disobedient officer with a single well-placed headbutt. Another claims Bucephalus has his own golden water bucket. You look. He does. Every detail of the horse's day is carefully managed. His feed? A specialized mix of barley, herbs, and olive mash, which smells surprisingly like overpriced granola. His sleep? 8 hours, uninterrupted, on hay flown in from a region whose name you can't pronounce. His hooves are cleaned more often than your boots. You wonder quietly if the next general promotion will go to Bucephalus or the guy in charge of polishing his saddle. And Alexander allows it. No, he encourages it. Because to him, Bucephalus isn't just a horse. He's morale. He's mystique. He's a living talisman that gallops between man and myth. The king feeds that image, piece by piece. You catch wind of a new armor design, silver nose plates and decorative plumes for Bucephalus, designed to make him look like a creature straight out of Homer's Iliad. Subtle? Not even a little. Effective? Undeniably. Historians agree the horse's privileges weren't just symbolic. There was strategy in it. In an age where soldiers believed in omens and portents, a horse who could gallop through chaos and emerge unscathed wasn't just impressive. It was divine. But was it all real? That's where the debates begin. Some scholars believe Bucephalus's reputation was inflated by court writers and storytellers, desperate to make Alexander's life seem touched by the gods. After all, a great king needs a great steed. Others argue that the details, the armor, the custom grooming, the golden oats, are too consistent across too many sources to be made up entirely. There's even a fringe theory that Bucephalus was the first creature granted honorary rank in the Macedonian army. There's no proof of this, of course. But it would explain the tent. You trail them further, to a ceremonial platform where Alexander is giving a speech. Not to his men, but to Bucephalus. He speaks softly, almost laughing at himself, but the affection is clear. "You carried me further than any map imagined," he murmurs, patting the beast's neck. "One day, you'll be remembered more fondly than I will." A nearby general raises an eyebrow. Another bites his tongue. You can practically hear the thought. Please don't let the king start building shrines to the horse. Too late. Soon after, rumors circulate that a sculptor has been commissioned. Not just for a bust of Alexander, but for a full-scale statue of Bucephalus. The artist is flown in from Athens with tools so fine they make even the palace smiths jealous. And when he arrives, he spends days sketching the horse from every angle. The tail flick, the nostril flare, the majestic but vaguely irritated posture. You'd swear Bucephalus is posing. Now comes the fun part. Materials. Marble, too cold. Bronze, too bland. The current plan? A mixture of lapis lazuli inlays, obsidian eyes, and a base engraved with every battle Bucephalus charged into. In short, it's a statue fit for a king who just happens to be shaped like a horse. You watch the sculptor muttering about muscle definition and heroic proportion while Bucephalus yawns in his direction. Somewhere nearby, a scribe is already drafting a poetic inscription. He bore the storm. He bore the sun. He bore the king. Too much? Maybe. But you've seen worse. Back in the stables, the animal's handlers prepare for yet another inspection. A daily ritual, bordering on religious. You're starting to think Bucephalus enjoys it. The brushing, the polishing, the gentle, "who's a good boy" murmurs in ancient Greek. Someone hums a lullaby as they oil his hooves. Then, just before sunset, you spot something small but significant. A medallion on the wall beside Bucephalus's stall. It's circular, made of hammered bronze, and bears the image of a horse rearing under a star. It's not just decoration, it's an offering, a token of protection. The kind normally placed in temples. You begin to understand, this isn't just a beloved animal, it's a myth under construction. And you, tired from the day's events, settle into a corner of the stables. Somewhere between the scent of hay and the rhythm of brushing, you start to doze off. Outside, the statue is already half carved, and inside, the real thing shifts his weight, lets out a long sigh, and returns to dreaming. Of deserts, of battles, and of being just a little bit more than a horse. You wake to the sound of waves, gentle at first, then louder, lapping against the wooden hull of a ship. The air is different now, salty, briny, and there's a thick breeze tugging at your cloak. You're standing on the deck of a Macedonian warship, the entire royal retinue on the move, and at the center of it all, Bucephalus, calm as ever, his hooves planted like he's carved from oak. Alexander is crossing the Hellespont. It's a narrow stretch of water, really just a few dozen kilometers separating Europe from Asia, but the symbolism is colossal. On one shore, the old world, familiar, Greek. On the other, Persia, mystery, empire, ambition. And like a scene out of a drama, Alexander tosses a spear into the sand the moment they land, claiming all of Asia as his by divine right. Classic Alexander. You're not the only one who notices the drama. The generals exchange amused glances, but no one dares call it overkill. And next to the king, Bucephalus snorts, not in mockery, but maybe just from boredom. He's seen this kind of thing before. What strikes you isn't the declaration. It's that Alexander does it with Bucephalus beside him, reins in hand. This isn't just pageantry. This is branding. A man and his horse crossing into legend together. Historians still puzzle over how symbolic this moment was in Alexander's mind. Was it a performance, a genuine belief in his divine destiny? Or, more practically, a morale tactic for the troops? Fringe theories even suggest the horse was deliberately trained to stand stoically during dramatic gestures, making Alexander seem calm, in control, chosen, whether by gods or by history. The journey inland is grueling. You ride over rocky trails, through forests buzzing with strange insects, past villages so small they don't appear on any map. And through it all, Bucephalus is a machine. Where other horses falter, he charges. Where others stumble, he glides. It's no wonder some of the soldiers start muttering that the horse must be enchanted, or possibly undead. Honestly, it's hard to say which they'd prefer. You start noticing patterns. If Bucephalus is restless in the morning, scouts often report trouble ahead. If he pauses at a riverbank, soldiers take the long way around. No one questions it anymore. The horse has become an oracle. There's one moment you won't forget. A narrow ravine, with buzzards circling overhead and the smell of something foul on the wind. The army hesitates. Alexander doesn't. He clicks his tongue, and Bucephalus steps forward, leading the entire force through what turns out to be an abandoned Persian outpost, one that still smolders from a recently extinguished fire. The symbolism isn't lost on anyone. Bucephalus leads. The army follows. At night, the animal gets his own patch of grass and a circle of guards. You overhear one of them say, only half joking, that if the king falls in battle, it'll be the horse who picks the next ruler. Even Alexander's enemies begin to notice. Persian scouts report sightings of a black demon horse with eyes like burning coals. That's a bit much, but it sticks. Later graffiti on Persian walls shows a crudely drawn man with a wild mane and a horse who looks like it could breathe fire. You're not sure who's supposed to be scarier. Now picture this, a desert night. Stars overhead, campfires flickering low. You walk past sleeping soldiers and find Alexander alone, brushing Bucephalus himself, quiet, focused. He murmurs words in a language long dead. You can't understand them, but the tone is unmistakable. Respect, friendship, maybe even awe. It's hard to overstate the bond here. The king, conqueror of cities, whispering to a horse as if it were the true North Star of the campaign. And maybe it is. One lesser-known fact? Bucephalus is believed to have a custom drinking bowl made of bronze, shaped like a lotus, carried by 2 slaves at all times. Why? Because he once refused to drink from a stream that spooked him, and Alexander nearly called off a march until it could be investigated. That's how seriously the king took his horse's comfort. You shake your head, smiling. It's ridiculous. It's excessive. It's kind of wonderful. The march continues. You pass groves of olive trees, abandoned fortresses, hidden springs where ancient spirits are said to whisper. And always, always, the image remains. Alexander astride Bucephalus, riding just a little ahead of everyone else, a silhouette against the rising sun. Some soldiers say it gives them courage. Others say it gives them chills. You just try to keep up. And when you finally crest the ridge and see the great plains of Anatolia unfurling before you, wide, golden, full of promise, you realize this moment will live in memory. Not because of the battles to come, but because of who stepped into the unknown first. A king and his horse. The plain stretches ahead like a parchment unrolled by the gods themselves, flat, vast, and humming with the quiet tension of history yet to happen. This is where you feel the pace slow, not just in your step, but in the breath of the army itself. Because today, Alexander isn't just marching, he's preparing to fight. And beside him, steady as sunrise, is Bucephalus. You're at the outskirts of what will become the Battle of Gaugamela, though no one calls it that yet. To the Macedonians, it's simply the place where Darius will fall, or they will. Supplies are restocked, formations reviewed, and armor gleams under the afternoon sun like molten fish scales. But you're not watching soldiers, you're watching the horse. Bucephalus has a ritual. It starts with an early grooming, not just a light brush, but a full spa day. Hooves cleaned, mane braided, flanks massaged with olive oil and crushed lavender. The scent drifts through camp like an elite cologne. Soldiers swear it brings luck. A few try rubbing their helmets in leftover oil. The results are mixed. One slips in the mud later and claims divine punishment. You watch as Bucephalus is dressed, not saddled, not strapped down, dressed in battle regalia. A deep purple cloth lined with silver threads, bronze plates etched with swirling motifs, part protection, part intimidation. The mask that slips over his face isn't just armor, it's theater. It turns the horse into a mythological creature, part stallion, part storm. And when he moves, even slowly, everyone watches. Alexander takes his time adjusting the straps himself. No delegation here. He tugs, tests, mutters to Bucephalus under his breath. You can't hear the words, but the rhythm sounds like a litany. Or maybe a prayer. The army is restless. There are rumors of Persian war elephants, scythed chariots, numbers that dwarf them 3-1. But none of that seems to touch Alexander's calm, and certainly not Bucephalus's. Historians still argue whether the horse was truly immune to fear, or if he simply trusted his rider enough to ignore it. Some believe he was trained using an early form of desensitization, shown strange noises, foreign scents, shadows, and flags until nothing startled him. Others say it was simply loyalty, that once bonded, the horse would follow Alexander into the sea, into fire, into whatever madness the king dreamed up next. You find a strange, fringe tidbit buried in the chatter. A soldier tells another that Bucephalus has never backed away from anything. Not once. Not in storms. Not in battle. Not even when confronted by a Persian ceremonial ox, painted gold and bellowing like a god. He bit it, the soldier adds with awe. Probably an exaggeration, but you glance at those teeth and quietly believe. In the moments before the charge, everything narrows. The clang of armor fades, the banners still, and you hear Alexander's voice, steady and sure, ring out to his troops. But before he speaks to them, he speaks to Bucephalus. Not loud, not for show. A murmur, a pat, a pause, just long enough to remind himself who's really been at his side the longest. Then the horn sounds. The earth shakes, not from marching men, but from the first thunderous stride of Bucephalus. You're riding just behind, and the ground quivers with every hoofbeat. Arrows whistle past. Shields slam together. The sky seems to blur with dust and the sound of war. But right there, in the eye of the storm, is the horse. Head high, legs like piston engines, breath snorting like smoke from a volcano. You catch sight of a Persian chariot cutting across the field, blades spinning from its wheels like something out of a nightmare. But Bucephalus doesn't flinch. Alexander leans forward, and together they veer, not away, but toward the danger. The horse leaps, hooves grazing the rim of the chariot, and lands with a crack like thunder. The enemy driver barely has time to react before the stallion's flank slams into the side like a battering ram. You've never seen anything like it. Neither have the Persians. A ripple of uncertainty moves through their ranks, not from tactics, not from formations, but because of a horse. A horse with no fear, no hesitation, and no reason to stop. When the battle ends, the field is quiet. Smoke rises from scattered fires. Shields lie broken in the dirt. And at the center of it all, Bucephalus stands tall, breathing hard, foam along his lips, but completely intact. Alexander dismounts and immediately checks his companion, more thoroughly than he checks himself. A nick on the leg, a scuff on the armor, but nothing serious. "You did it again," he says softly. The horse nudges his shoulder. You swear it's a nod. In the days that follow, the soldiers speak more of Bucephalus than the tactics. Children in nearby villages start imitating his rearing pose with sticks and towels. One local woman lights a candle for him alongside her household gods. And that night, you sleep near the edge of camp, near the stall where Bucephalus rests. The sky is clearer than it's been in weeks. You hear the horse shift in the straw, then let out a long, slow breath. Victory has its own silence. You wake to golden sunlight filtering through palm fronds. The air is warm, thick with spice and salt, and somewhere nearby the lazy murmur of a crowd stirs. You're not in Macedon anymore. Not even close. You're in Egypt. Specifically, you're in the recently conquered city of Memphis, one of many that Alexander has swept into his empire. But this city is different. Older. Wiser. The Nile winds past like a sleeping god, and the pyramids stand off in the distance, unimpressed by the newcomers. Alexander is in diplomatic mode, accepting offerings, giving speeches, dressing just regal enough to remind the locals he's not some transient warlord. And beside him, drawing just as many eyes as the king himself, is Bucephalus. If you were a time-traveling tourist trying to find the most pampered horse in human history, this might be your best shot. Bucephalus is paraded like royalty, not just stabled, enshrined. Temple priests come to study his gait. Egyptian children point and giggle. Even the local cats seem a little bit intimidated. The Egyptians love symbolism, and Bucephalus, this massive, dark, commanding presence, is immediately woven into their mythos. One priest even refers to him as a manifestation of Montu, the falcon-headed god of war. Alexander doesn't object. Not at all. If anything, he leans into it. Historians still argue whether this Egyptian deification of Bucephalus was real or exaggerated after the fact. Some sources suggest formal altars were constructed in the horse's honor. Others say the offerings, bread, honey, herbs, were simply gestures of curiosity. But there's no doubt that Bucephalus was treated here not as an animal, but as something divine adjacent. You trail them through a festival procession. Alexander walks on foot this time, leading Bucephalus through flower-strewn streets while priests chant in ancient Egyptian. The horse is draped in fine linen, embroidered with lotus patterns. Around his neck, a garland of blue beads clinks with every step. You'd think he'd object to the pageantry, but no. He walks like he knows the role he's playing. One older priest stops and touches Bucephalus's flank with both hands, murmuring blessings. Alexander waits patiently. When the man finishes, he bows, not to the king, but to the horse, and you can't even say it feels out of place. Later, in Alexandria, Alexander's shining new city, you visit the unfinished temple plans. There's a mural being painted, large and colorful, depicting Alexander standing before the god Amun. But right next to him, just as central, is Bucephalus. The horse is rearing, mane wild, with one hoof planted on the old world and the other stepping into Asia. Symbolic? Absolutely. But also a bit literal. This horse really is covering continents. You sit under a fig tree and overhear some of the city architects discussing logistics. Not about fortifications or aqueducts, but about building a small garden temple just for Bucephalus, complete with a reflecting pool and incense braziers. One of them rolls his eyes, but draws the plans anyway. Meanwhile, back in the royal quarters, Bucephalus is being painted again, this time by a Persian artist whose work is so precise, he's known to count each individual hair in a horse's tail. Alexander insists the portrait be hung in the library. When asked why not his own portrait, the king simply says, "People already know what I look like." Quirky, yes, but telling. Now here's a strange detail. One night, during a thunderstorm over the delta, Bucephalus breaks free of his tether and gallops out into the rain. Chaos ensues. Guards rush out, torches flicker. Some claim he's possessed. Others whisper he's returning to the gods. You follow the hoofprints to a stone outcrop near the edge of the Nile, where you find him standing, soaked, massive, still, facing east. Alexander finds him minutes later, says nothing, just stands beside the beast in the storm. No reins, no commands, just silence and thunder. Some claim this moment convinced Alexander he'd been chosen, not just to rule, but to unite. That Bucephalus, in some mystical way, was pointing the way forward. The fringe theory? That this was when the king first imagined the full scope of his empire, from the Nile to the Indus. You return to camp drenched but energized. Something has shifted. The army can feel it too. From this point forward, Bucephalus isn't just respected, he's revered. The men start saluting when they pass him. Some carry miniature charms shaped like his head. One particularly devoted soldier has the horse's profile carved into his shield. And at every major ceremony, every feast, every festival, every divine consultation, Bucephalus is present, polished, braided, blessed. A general quips, "If this keeps up, we'll be building pyramids for him." Alexander, not missing a beat, replies, "Maybe we will." You smile. You don't even think it's a joke anymore. The heat rises off the plains in waves. You squint at the horizon, where the dust of another city's fall still lingers in the air. Alexander is moving east now, deep into lands few Greeks have ever seen, and as always, Bucephalus moves with him. You're riding through Persia proper, following the trail of broken gates and stunned governors, of cities renamed Alexandria so frequently that the soldiers start using nicknames just to keep track. But there's one constant that no one confuses: the silhouette of a rider and his steed, always at the head of the column, always moving just a little faster than logic suggests. Bucephalus is aging now. Not visibly, not yet, but you notice. The stride is more measured, the breaths come slower at rest, but he's still majestic, still terrifying when he charges, still the one creature Alexander trusts implicitly. They're heading toward Babylon. Now Babylon is no mere city. It's legend, ancient even to the ancient. And as you approach its massive blue-tiled gates, you feel history folding in on itself. The soldiers whisper about omens, how the stars don't quite align, how the air feels too still. And yet, Alexander smiles, because he has Bucephalus beside him. The entrance is theatrical. Trumpets, locals throwing petals, high priests murmuring blessings that sound suspiciously like product endorsements. But the real showstopper? Bucephalus's armor, now trimmed in lapis lazuli and etched with Babylonian constellations. If Alexander is Apollo on Earth, Bucephalus has become Pegasus with better hooves. One strange moment sticks with you. A Babylonian noble approaches the pair, not with gold, not with wine, but with a tiger cub. "A gift for the horse," he says, completely serious. You brace for chaos. Instead, Bucephalus leans down and sniffs the cub gently, then turns away, unimpressed. The crowd exhales. The noble bows. Alexander laughs and says, "Even beasts bring him tribute now." The story spreads instantly. By nightfall, some claim the tiger bowed. Others say it spoke. Historians still argue whether this actually happened. Some say it's metaphor layered on metaphor. But the tale sticks like burrs on a saddle. You find yourself in the newly expanded royal stables, where Bucephalus's quarters resemble a miniature palace, carved stone troughs, hanging incense. A groom assigned solely to fanning him in the midday heat. One Persian advisor quietly complains that he now outranks 5 minor officials. You overhear a debate between 2 scribes. Is Bucephalus still just a horse, or is he now a title? A living symbol like Pharaoh or Shah? He's more consistent than most kings, one says, and more beloved. There's also talk of a new coin design, one side with Alexander's face, the other with Bucephalus mid-gallop. Not warlike, not trampling enemies, just moving forward. It's subtle, elegant, and possibly the most powerful propaganda tool the Empire has yet devised. But the real honor comes later, during a strange little ritual that few sources even mention. In a quiet ceremony with a handful of trusted men, Alexander places a circlet, not gold but polished horn, on Bucephalus's head. The symbolism? Blending the beast with ancient solar deities. It's half joke, half dogma, and entirely Alexander. You stay close that night, watching the animal sleep, flanks rising and falling like the tide. You wonder what he dreams about. Battles? Meadows? Alexander's voice? Here's the thing. Bucephalus isn't just carrying a man anymore. He's carrying an empire, one hoofbeat at a time. And the empire responds. You notice statues cropping up, not of Alexander alone, but of him mounted on Bucephalus, or just the horse himself, haloed by sun rays. Kids imitate his stomp. Poets compose verses comparing his breath to thunder, his mane to waves. One even claims that when Bucephalus gallops, the wind itself bows away. Historians today file these under epic embellishments. Fringe theories go further, suggesting secret cults formed around the horse, miniature, short-lived, but real. It's hard to say, but you wouldn't be surprised. Even the name spreads. Bucephalus becomes shorthand in military reports. We'll need a Bucephalus to break that line. Or he charges like a damn Bucephalus. The word leaves the horse behind and becomes something else, an idea. There's a quiet moment later when Alexander stands alone in the courtyard, looking up at the stars. Bucephalus is nearby, grazing. The king says nothing. just lifts a hand to the sky as if measuring how far he has yet to go. Then he turns to the horse and says simply, "Still with me?" The horse lifts his head. Still, always. You're riding through terrain that no one back home could name. The grasses are taller, the air thinner, the birds stranger in both color and cry. You're deep in what is now modern-day Pakistan, but to Alexander and his men, this is simply the edge of the world, if the world has edges. And right there in the dust, wind, and marching feet is Bucephalus, still pressing forward. Alexander's army is thinner now, not weak, just stretched across languages, landscapes, and time. Some of the original companions are gone, some new faces have joined, but Bucephalus remains. He always remains. You're approaching a river now, the Hydaspes, fast and brown, swollen from monsoon rains. And across that river is King Porus, ruler of a local kingdom, with war elephants armored in iron and painted like nightmares. Alexander stares across the water and smiles. He loves a dramatic opponent. But privately, the officers worry. They've never fought elephants before. No one has. And a few whisper whether Bucephalus, now aging, can handle it. Some even suggest he should be kept behind, protected. Alexander does not answer those people. He simply saddles the horse himself. The Battle of Hydaspes becomes legend. Dawn breaks with heavy fog, the kind that muffles even the sound of drums. You ride just behind the vanguard as Bucephalus steps into the shallows of the river, water swirling around his legs. It's a surreal image. War banners soaked, the king silent, and this black shape cutting through the mist like a myth in motion. And when they emerge on the far bank, the charge begins. Historians agree that Bucephalus played a central role. He was more than transport, he was strategy. Alexander used him to maneuver swiftly, drawing the elephants toward one flank, baiting, dodging, returning, always just out of reach. It was like watching a dance, but one where every step could shatter bone. There's a moment when an elephant barrels forward, trumpeting like thunder incarnate. The men scatter. Even hardened horses rear and bolt. But not Bucephalus. He holds, his eyes fixed, ears back, nostrils flaring, but unmoving. Alexander presses forward, and the two giants, elephant and horse, clash in an almost cinematic sweep. The elephant's rider swings down with a curved blade. Bucephalus ducks, sidesteps, spins, and Alexander strikes. Clean, precise. A moment that will echo in paintings and poems for centuries. You're nearly trampled in the chaos that follows. Arrows zip past. Mud kicks into your eyes. But always you look for the black blur of that horse. And every time, you find him, carving circles in enemy lines like a ghost with hooves. By nightfall, the field is quiet again. The river runs red, as they say, but the mood in camp is reverent, not for the victory, but for the ones who stood at its center. Alexander approaches Bucephalus, who is nicked, tired, and covered in dust. He kneels, yes, kneels, and presses his forehead to the horse's neck. No words, just breath. Then comes something no one expected. Alexander names a city after the horse, Bucephala. It's not a grand metropolis, not yet, just a handful of stone foundations and a plan sketched in the dust. But it's real. The first and only city in the empire not named after Alexander himself, but after his companion. Historians confirm this part. It's in multiple records. A city named for a horse. Not out of novelty, not for politics, but because it meant something. That night, around the campfires, the soldiers don't sing of Alexander. They sing of Bucephalus, of the horse who faced an elephant and won, of the beast who crossed every known border from the Balkans to the Indus and never once turned back. Even the locals, those spared in the battle, begin to share tales. They say the horse moved without sound, that his breath brought wind. One even claims Bucephalus had eyes that glowed in the dark. Is it myth? Of course. Is it real? That depends who you ask. But here's a curious fringe detail. A carved stone found centuries later, buried under dust, with an inscription in ancient Greek and Sanskrit. It reads, "To the one who bore the storm." No name, but you know exactly who it was meant for. The road ahead is less of a road and more of a thread, frayed, narrow, and winding through terrain that seems actively hostile to human presence. The Hindu Kush mountains rise like jagged scars against the sky, their snowy caps glinting in the morning light. Alexander presses forward, ever eastward, and Bucephalus follows. Still, the horse is older now. You feel it. You hear it. The slight stiffness in his stride, the longer pauses at rivers, the way he stands a little closer to campfires when night chills fall. But in the eyes, fire. unchanged. A beast that has carried an empire across half the known world still looks ready to sprint into legend. The army feels it too. There's a hush that follows Bucephalus wherever he walks. No one dares joke about his age. Not when he's still climbing mountain passes most men struggle to survive. Not when he still wakes at dawn, snorts at the cold, and moves forward without waiting for command. Alexander too has changed. His beard is fuller, his gaze heavier. But when he's with Bucephalus, the old glint returns. The boy who once tamed a wild stallion in front of stunned nobles never left. You watch them one morning during a snowstorm. The king brushes snow from the horse's back by hand, whispering what sounds like ancient poetry. You catch 3 words. My best friend. The campaign slows. The mountains are cruel. Food is scarce. Morale dips. Men mutter of omens, of strange animals spotted in the rocks, of dreams where Bucephalus vanishes into mist. The horse becomes a kind of emotional compass for the troops. If he's calm, they'll be fine. If he stumbles, that's what makes the stumble so terrifying. It happens on a narrow pass. You're behind the king, the wind's howling so loud you barely hear the cry. Bucephalus falters. Just one step, a slip of the hoof. But it's enough. Alexander swings off instantly, steadying him, and the entire line of troops behind them freezes. Time seems to slow. Bucephalus breathes hard. His chest heaves. You see something. Fatigue, pain, flash across his face. But after a moment, he snorts, digs in, and takes another step, then another, and the army exhales as one. Later that night, a new rumor is born. Bucephalus challenged the mountain and won. Still, Alexander knows what the stumble meant. You see it in how he walks beside the horse now instead of riding him through harsh terrain. You hear it in the new tone of his voice, gentler, quieter. He's preparing, perhaps not for a battle, but for a goodbye. Historians still argue about the next part. There's no clear record of Bucephalus's exact date of death. Some say it happened here in these mountains. Others argue he survived months longer, even another year. But most agree on this. He began to fade, not dramatically, not with noise, with grace. One fringe account, rare half-lost, says that Alexander built a temporary shrine of ice and stone during a long pause in the march. No inscription, just a circle of rocks around a patch of moss where Bucephalus would rest. He wouldn't allow anyone else to lead him through it. He called it the quiet place. You visit it once, still there, still quiet. Another curious tidbit. A soldier tells you he overheard the king instructing a scribe to start composing a eulogy for a horse. Make it gentle, Alexander had said, and make it honest. It's hard not to feel something crack inside you, because for all the cities renamed, all the battles won, all the kings deposed, this aging horse is what Alexander seems to mourn the most. By now, Bucephalus sleeps more often, stays closer to the warmth, eats slower. But when a scout arrives with word of a distant revolt, Alexander whistles, and the horse still rises. Not because he has to, because he wants to. One last ride. You watch them vanish into the mists, one more silhouette against the edge of the known world. The rain comes hard now, torrential, soaking through tunics, turning roads to rivers, and dampening even the boldest campfire songs. You're somewhere near the edge of the Punjab region, but no one is sure where the edge even begins. The jungle looms thick and strange, breathing steam and secrets, and through this foreign, humid labyrinth walks Bucephalus. Slower now, more deliberate, but still walking. The path is slick with mud and hidden stones, and the army trudges forward like a single exhausted organism. The exotic bird calls, the leeches, the swarming insects. It's all new and vaguely hostile. But Alexander remains undeterred. Beside him, as always, Bucephalus matches pace. This stretch of the campaign isn't filled with glory. No grand cities, no soaring monuments. It's just long days, longer nights, and the persistent ache of everything, from heels to hopes. Yet oddly, this is where the stories get quieter, gentler. The soldiers begin telling tales not of kings or gods, but of their horses. And of course, one horse in particular. You hear a young recruit, barely old enough to shave, whisper to his tent mate. They say Bucephalus never sleeps lying down. He stands, always ready, because he knows if he rests, the world stops. They laugh, but then they fall silent, just listening to the patter of rain on canvas. By now, the army has begun calling Bucephalus the Old General. No one dares say it to Alexander's face, of course, but privately, it fits. If Alexander is the mind of the campaign, Bucephalus is the heart. Some believe the horse is holding on by will alone, refusing to go until the story is finished. Then one morning, the news comes. A fever. The king is with him, personally. No one sees Alexander that day. The tent is closed. The guards are doubled. Rumors fly like startled birds. Was it snakebite, poison, or simply age? You walk by later, quietly. You hear the soft murmur of water being poured, the muted sound of a voice you've heard shout over battlefields now trembling as it says, "Easy now, there you go." Bucephalus doesn't rise that evening, but he's still breathing. You find a curious fringe account, possibly apocryphal, that Alexander spent the entire night brushing his mane, one stroke at a time until dawn. Not speaking, not crying, just brushing. Historians still argue whether Bucephalus died here, that's in the rain and green mist of India, or later, after one final slow march westward. But this is the night most agree he began to leave. The army prepares a clearing, not for a battle, for a farewell. Alexander emerges, face unreadable. He walks Bucephalus to the edge of the forest, one last stretch of sunlight breaking through the trees. You follow, heart in your throat, and then he dismounts. Bucephalus stands still. Then Alexander steps back and bows. The soldiers follow suit. One by one, an entire army bowing not to a god, not to a king, but to a horse. No orders are given, no trumpet sounds, but a silence falls like a shroud. You know in your bones that something larger than life has ended. That night, the camp stays quiet. No music, no shouting, just the sound of rain. In a nearby grove, torches flicker around a small mound of earth, already adorned with wildflowers, bits of ribbon, and oddly, a single golden horseshoe. No one knows who left it, but no one touches it. And Alexander, he sits nearby alone, hands folded. He doesn't weep, but he doesn't speak either. You feel for the first time the full weight of what's been lost. Not a warhorse, not a symbol, a friend. The days feel quieter now. Not because the war is over, it isn't. Not because Alexander has stopped dreaming, he hasn't. But because something central is missing and no one dares name it out loud. The march continues west, away from the lush chaos of India, back through scorched plains and wind-blown cliffs. But Bucephalus's hoofbeats are no longer at the head of the column. There's only empty space now, and the soldiers feel it like a missing tooth, small but constantly noticed. Alexander walks more often, alone. No other horse takes Bucephalus's place, not officially. A few are offered, fine beasts, strong and well-trained. He nods politely, even rides them in short bursts, but none last, none connect. Because how do you replace the horse that carried your legend? You pass through one of the last cities named Alexandria. It's a modest one, still half under construction, dusty, dry, and humming with the sound of chisels on stone. You hear murmurs that the main avenue will be called Bucephalus Way, and at the center of the plaza, a raised pedestal, empty, for now. But plans are being drawn. A statue will be made, larger than life, not of Alexander, not this time, but of Bucephalus, mid-gallop, with mane sculpted to catch the desert wind and one hoof raised above a stylized battlefield. It won't be just a memorial, it'll be a statement. This horse mattered. You recall a fringe anecdote, barely preserved in a soldier's journal. Alexander once told a group of generals that Bucephalus was the only creature he trusted more than himself. A joke, maybe. But no one laughed. Historians still debate whether this moment, the posthumous elevation of a warhorse to the realm of marble and myth, was born of grief, or politics, or something stranger. Some say Alexander was preparing for a new kind of cult, not for gods, but for ideals, loyalty, courage, resilience, all embodied in one magnificent beast. In camp, old soldiers tell Bucephalus stories to new recruits. They act them out with exaggerated snorts and hooves. But underneath the humor is reverence. One says, "When I lost my brother, I didn't cry. When that horse fell, I couldn't stop." Even the locals know the name now. In bazaars and alleyways, children play Alexander and Bucephalus, chasing each other with sticks and sandals, making heroic noises. In one village, you find a clay toy, crudely shaped but unmistakably meant to be the great horse. Someone cared enough to sculpt it by hand. The stories evolve. One claims Bucephalus could speak only to Alexander and only at dawn. Another says his hooves left permanent burns in the earth where he ran. A traveling bard sings a ballad in which Bucephalus leaps over a wall of fire to save his king. All false? Maybe. But when you listen, you don't want them to be. One night, under a canopy of stars, Alexander calls his scribe. You listen from just beyond the torchlight. His voice is quiet, tired. Write it plain, he says. Not as a god, not as a legend, just as he was. The scribe nods, his quill still. Alexander continues. He was strong, he was stubborn, he made me better, and he never left. That line makes it into no official chronicle, but you write it down in your own notes, just in case. As the column moves on, the army feels different, not weaker, but more human. The distance between gods and men has closed slightly. The war continues, but the grandeur is dimmed. Even victories feel quieter. One afternoon, you pass a field of wildflowers. A few soldiers stop. One plucks a blossom and tucks it behind his belt. For him, he says. And no one asks who, because they know. Dust curls around your ankles as the army snakes its way into Mesopotamia again. This time, not as conquerors, but as something softer, warier, older, wiser. And though Bucephalus no longer walks among them, his presence still does. You see it in the way Alexander now holds the reins of his new mount, looser, less commanding. You see it in the quiet glances he gives to the horizon, as if expecting a dark shape to appear on the ridge, head high, tail whipping, ready to ride again. But it doesn't. Instead, you find his shadow in stone. The statue is finished now. You enter the square of the newly founded city of Bucephala, a modest place with markets, a bathhouse, and the warm scent of baking bread. And in the center stands the statue, massive, beautiful, deeply alive. Bucephalus mid-gallop, cast in bronze. His eyes look out across the city he never lived to see, his mane caught in a sculpted wind. One hoof raised as if still mid-step. The saddle is simple, no frills, just like the one he wore in battle. You hear a child ask his mother, "Was that the king's horse?" The mother replies, "No, that was the king's heart." Alexander himself commissioned it, of course. Spared no expense. Called artisans from across the empire, Greek, Persian, Egyptian, even an Indian sculptor who'd only seen Bucephalus once, but never forgot the shape of him. The statue took months, and on the day it was unveiled, Alexander didn't speak. He stood in silence, looking up at his companion cast in eternal motion. Then he placed a small wreath at its base, a cluster of wild grasses from the Indus Valley, tied with a leather strap from Bucephalus's original tack. No fanfare, no grand speech, just memory. Historians still wonder if this moment marked the beginning of Alexander's final phase. Less warrior, more philosopher. Less conqueror, more dreamer. He'd seen the edge of the world, and perhaps, without Bucephalus to gallop beside him, he realized the world didn't need to be pushed any further. One fringe story says that Alexander began speaking aloud to the statue at night. That guards sometimes found him at its base, muttering strategy or telling jokes with no audience but bronze ears. Is it true? Maybe. Maybe not. But you can picture it easily. Even in official meetings, you notice a shift. Alexander listens more, delegates more, walks the city streets alone, trailing his fingers across walls and market stalls. And always, always, that statue is nearby, visible from nearly every corner. One day, an old general approaches and says, "You've made him a god." Alexander smiles, tired. "No," he says, "I made him known." You stumble across a small shrine tucked behind a bakery. Inside, candles, incense, and a tiny sculpture of Bucephalus, crudely shaped, lovingly painted. Someone leaves a coin and a petal. You realize people have begun praying to him. Not for war, but for loyalty, for safe travel, for bravery. And across the empire, Bucephalus becomes more than a horse. He becomes a symbol. In Alexandria, you hear about a temple frieze being planned, half war scenes, half a depiction of Bucephalus's birth, though no one really knows how that looked. In Athens, a young poet publishes a scroll titled "The Steed of Storms." It sells out. You sit one evening in a tavern and hear a drunken sailor ranting about how his dog is just like Bucephalus. Everyone laughs, but no one mocks the name. Because to say it is to invoke something. Even Alexander seems aware of this power. When he addresses his men for what might be the final campaign, to Arabia, perhaps, or Ethiopia, he begins not with war plans, but with a toast. To the one who carried me farther than any dream. He doesn't say the name. He doesn't have to. You arrive in Babylon under a sky thick with heat and portent. The great city hums with life, but something about the rhythm feels off, as if the very stones know that something is ending. Alexander returns not as a triumphant hero, but as a man changed. His face is leaner, his hair streaked with sun and years. But more than that, there's an absence in him, a subtle, persistent hollow that no crown can fill. The statue of Bucephalus arrives a few days later. Shipped in massive pieces from the city of Bucephala, it is reassembled in silence, just beyond the palace gardens. This one is different than the bronze galloping one. Here, the great horse is at rest, head slightly bowed, muscles relaxed, eyes closed. It's a grave marker in everything but name. You sit beside it at dusk. Others do too, soldiers, children, even a few palace scribes who bring paper and sketch by lamplight. Someone leaves a bunch of withered desert flowers tied with twine. Someone else a scrap of red cloth, maybe from an old saddle blanket. And on the stone at the base, freshly carved words, "The one who carried the thunder and never dropped the storm." Historians still debate the authorship. Some say Alexander wrote it himself. Others insist it was one of his philosophers. Either way, the words ring truer than any royal decree. Now, everywhere you look, there are echoes. In Babylon's marketplaces, tiny bronze pendants of Bucephalus hang beside symbols of gods. A children's song spreads among local families. Black horse, brave heart, crossed the seas and stars apart. You hear it hummed under breath, even by mothers who don't know who Alexander really is. It doesn't matter, because they know the horse. Fringe accounts from the time suggest a brief but passionate surge of horse cults. Small altars, garlands, and water bowls placed in homes with hand-painted images of Bucephalus. Scholars scoff now, but the archaeological fragments, tiny hoof charms, oil lamps shaped like his head, still turn up. Even the name becomes sacred. One merchant renames his caravan route the Bucephalus line, boasting safe passage and unbroken loyalty from every guard. You ride with them once. Their banners bear not a lion or eagle, but a simple horse's head. Alexander, meanwhile, becomes quieter. He walks in the mornings, always ending his path beneath the statue's gaze. One day you catch him talking softly. You don't catch every word, but one phrase reaches you. Still the only one who never asked anything from me. No one interrupts. No one dares. The empire is fraying at the edges. Rebellions rise, governors squabble. But at the heart of it all sits Alexander, planning his next move. And beside him, not in flesh, but in stone, in myth, in memory, is the horse that carried it all. A statue in every city, a story in every language, a ghost in every silence. You hear eventually of a strange dream Alexander shares with his inner circle. In it, he and Bucephalus are galloping, not through battle, but through stars. No rains, no war, just endless wind, endless movement. He wakes with tears on his cheeks. Must have been the wine, he says, but no one believes him. And perhaps the most curious detail. On his personal seal, the ring used to stamp orders, to command armies, to move the world, Alexander has had the engraving changed. No longer a lion, no longer a thunderbolt, just a simple outline. A horse, galloping forward. The rooms in Babylon are dim and heavy now, not with smoke or incense, but with expectation. You feel it in the corridors, where soldiers glance sideways at every cough. You hear it in the softer voices of scribes, in the way boots echo too loudly on tile floors. Something is ending. And then comes the word. Alexander is ill. It begins like nothing. Fever, chills, exhaustion. But within days, the king, who once rode through monsoons and over mountains, can barely lift his head. Doctors crowd his bed. Offerings are made. Prayers whispered. Nothing changes. But you know what's missing. There is no Bucephalus at his side. Some say that's what undid him, that the horse had been more than muscle and loyalty. He'd been a tether, a living connection to youth, to ambition, to identity. And with him gone, Alexander was simply unmoored. You sit outside the king's chambers one night, sleepless. A servant appears, carrying a small carved object. He places it gently at the door, a miniature wooden horse, shaped to resemble Bucephalus. Others follow. Over the next few hours, trinkets gather like offerings at a shrine. Bronze horseshoes, bits of mane, real or fake, scraps of saddlecloth, poems scrawled on parchment. Even a child's drawing, crude and charming. Alexander, smiling on a towering steed. Inside, you imagine the king, drifting between dreams and memories. Some say he speaks aloud to an invisible presence. Some say he murmurs only one word, over and over. Ride. Historians still argue what killed Alexander. Malaria, typhoid, poisoning, divine punishment. But those who were there speak only of the stillness in the room when he finally fell silent, and of the breeze that swept through his chamber at that exact moment, though no windows were open. The funeral is immense. Fire, chanting, banners taller than buildings. His sarcophagus gleams like a mountain under moonlight. But in the procession, just behind the casket, rides an empty horse, black, sleek, with a wreath around its neck. Not Bucephalus, of course, but everyone pretends. And when the empire splinters, when generals bicker and borders dissolve, only one story holds firm across all the lands: the boy and his horse, Alexander and Bucephalus. You return, years later, to one of the cities renamed in their honor. The statue still stands. Weathered, yes. Cracked in places, but strong. Children climb it. Old men leave flowers. A woman teaches her son to bow before it. You ask why. She shrugs, smiles. Because he carried the king. And in that moment, you realize he still does. Even now. Not with muscle or motion, but with memory, with myth, with the hoofbeats echoing through every tale that's ever been whispered beside a fire. The king is gone, but the horse runs on, forever. And now we leave the dust behind. Let the hoofbeats fade into the hush of distant stars, soft and slow, like waves against a silent shore. You followed a long road, across battlefields and deserts, over rivers, and through the rise and fall of empires. But more than the clash of swords or the roar of crowds, what lingers is the quiet companionship of one horse and one rider. Their story didn't need magic or dragons, just trust and time. Bucephalus was no ordinary creature. He was not carved by myth, but by miles. He was shaped by dust, sun, and the steady pull of the unknown. And perhaps that's why he endured, not as a monster or god, but as something rarer, a friend. So as you rest your head tonight, let that loyalty wrap around you like a warm blanket. Let the steady rhythm of hooves in memory lull you to stillness. There's no need to rush, no need to conquer. Just breathe. Somewhere out there, in story, in stone, in starlight, he still runs. And perhaps, if you listen closely, you can hear him. Good night.